for science!
It's very easy to overload a deck with spells, only to play a few games and realize that you don't have much of anything on the board. Spells in Hearthstone work very specifically, and when used incorrectly, can be the difference between winning and losing. The fact of the matter is that all spells support minions. There are a smattering of decks that focus on spells, but even these decks require certain minions to make such strategies work, and even these are considered pretty gimmicky decks that do not have much consistency. The issue that most spells have to deal with is that they do not on their own adequately inspire the main mechanic by which one wins a Hearthstone game, gaining tempo. Most spells only trade 1 for 1 because they can only target one minion at a time. This is why all of the AoE spells or area of effect spells are so commonly used. Then there are spells that augment other minions, but they're only worth it if you can trade 2 for 1 with that minion that you buffed. Another subset of spells does not affect the board at all, but instead affects the amount of cards you have in your hand. But this effect is really only useful if you already have board control. There are also other spells that do damage but also provide some other benefit, like a buff to the board, or provide some form of card draw. It is also interesting to note that there are no neutral spells. Decks that possess a lot of spells tend to be highly aggressive because of their inability to inhabit much presence on the board. They also rely on acquiring spells very quickly through the use of many weak card draw cards, like Loot Hoarder or the Gnomish Inventor, or a Spellweaver's favorite, the Azure Drake. The most common spell-oriented deck is the Freeze Mage, consisting of many high-damage spells that can directly attack your opponent's face, but must stall the game out as long as possible to acquire the spells needed for this combo. To this end, the Freeze Mage has very little presence on the board, and instead employs gimmicky minions like the Doomsayer to control the board as much as possible, and secrets like Ice Block to delay long enough to attain the necessary spells. It is a very cerebral deck to play because it requires you to constantly be adding how much damage you can do at every turn. As stable as this deck is on the ladder, it is still quite gimmicky, and only works in conjunction with the mage spells. So trying to construct your own deck with another class that will attain some level of consistency is unlikely. This is not to say that spell-focused decks are impossible, and to be honest, they're very fun to play if you can find one. But so far, they have been very difficult to pull off consistently. The only other class to have a spell-focused deck is the Shaman, so you can check out that class if you're interested in constructing a spell-oriented deck. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to leave it at that. When you're revising your decks, it might be useful to locate spells that can be replaced by minions with battle cries of similar effect and of mana cost. This is not to say that spells are not useful, but they are meant to support what is already on the board. This is also why it is deemed unfavorable most of the time to be holding a lot of spells in your starting hand, because you won't have anything on the board to gain extra tempo with. And they can only at best trade 1 card for 1 card, especially at the earlier turns where mana is scarce. This is the Science of Spells, and thanks for watching. If you have an idea for a Hearthstone science video, or have a question or comment, leave it down below. And if you've never used spells to support your minions instead of the other way around, start now.